The cottage is small and timber-framed. Its walls are soft grey, brown of old oak and wattle filled with daub. The thatch above smelling faintly of dried reed and wood smoke. You open your eyes to the pre-dawn darkness. Not a true dark, but a deep blue-grey filtering through the single unshuttered window. The hearth fire, carefully banked the night before with ash over a thick log, still holds a core of orange that pulses like a slow breath. You lie still for a moment under a heap of wool blankets, feeling the weight, the scratch of the fibers against your chin. The air is cool on your face, a chill that speaks of a clear morning in early autumn, perhaps September, with the oak leaves just beginning to think of turning. There is no hurry. The iron waits in the forest, the furnace is cold. You push back the blankets and sit up on the straw-filled mattress, the ropes beneath creaking a familiar sound. A sound as ordinary as the first birdsong now beginning outside in the holly tree by the door. You stand, stretch the stiffness from your shoulders, and cross the packed earth floor to the hearth. The wooden boards feel smooth and cool under your bare feet. Crouching, use a thin iron poker to scrape away the ash blanket, uncovering the live ember that blows brighter in the sudden air. You feed it a few dried twigs from the basket on the hearthstone, then a handful of smaller charcoal lumps, and watch the flame catch with a soft flutter. Smoke curls upwards to the blackened hood and disappears through the lath and plaster ceiling. It is the first small act of the day, and it takes only the time of a few slow breaths. Next to the hearth, a small iron pot rests on its trivet, the remains of last evening's pottage thickened overnight. You stir it with a wooden spoon, place it closer to the growing flame, and let it warm while you dress. Your clothing hangs on a peg by the door, simple and heavy, a linen shirt, warm, soft and grey with many washings, and over it a wool doublet of undyed brown, patched at one elbow with a lighter scrap. Breeches of the same coarse wool, thick woolen hose and sturdy leather boots that come halfway up your calves, the soles reinforced with iron hobnails. You pull each piece on slowly, the fabric cool at first, then quickly taking on your warmth, the familiar weight settling on your limbs. Around your waist, you tie a leather belt, and from it, a pouch with a lump of bread and a small wedge of hard cheese wrapped in a cloth. A leather bottle filled with water from the brook hangs there too, its wooden stopper tight. You pause to fasten a loose toggle on the doublet, a small delay that is not impatience, but a kind of quiet attention you give to every detail of the morning. Then you use a poker to lift the pot from the fire, ladle a portion of the pottage into a wooden bowl, and eat standing by the one window. The pottage is a simple mix of barley, leeks from the garden plot, and a little bacon that gives it a smoky saltiness. You eat without haste, watching the light change from blue-grey to a softer pearl. Picking out the shapes of the hazel thicket just outside, the dark line of the sunken track, and the first suggestion of mist moving among the lower branches of the oaks. The world is quiet, so quiet that you can hear the small fizz of the fire, the occasional drip of dew from the thatch, and your own jaw working the food. When the bowl is empty, you rinse it with a splash of water from a leather bucket, set it upside down on the hearthstone, and take your felt hat from its peg. It is a wide-brimmed hat, darkened with rain and sweat, and you place it on your head, the brim shading your eyes from even the imagined glare of the yet risen sun. At the door you lift the latch, a simple iron bar that lifts with a thumbnail, and step out into the forest. The threshold flagstone is worn into a shallow dip where countless boots have passed. You stand there for a moment, drawing the damp air into your lungs. The mist is thin and patchy, lying low over the bracken and pooling in the hollows between trees like a breath held. It touches the holly leaves, the feathery stalks of wood sorrel, the grey-green moss that covers the north sides of every larger oak, and then it shifts, slowly, in a breeze you cannot feel. You begin to walk. The sunken track leads away from the cottage door, a narrow way hollowed into the forest floor over centuries by the hooves of pack horses, by the wheels of carts, by the bare feet and hobnailed boots of charcoal burners and miners and smelters before you. Its banks rise to just above your waist on either side, held together by the gnarled roots of beech and oak, and in the dimness the track ahead is a ribbon of darker brown, scattered with small stones and last year's leaves, now soft with decay. You follow it with the easy stride of long familiarity, your boots crunching gently on the mixed surface. Each footstep makes a distinct sound, a soft scuff and a slight grinding of hobnails on quartz pebbles, then the hush of leaves. It is a rhythm that asks nothing of your thoughts, a steady beat, like the heart of the forest floor. To your left, a stand of coppiced hazel rises, the stools ancient and broad, the new rods thin and straight as lances, cut back every 7 years for charcoal and wattles. Beyond them, the larger timber trees, standard oaks grown tall for shipbuilding, spread their lower limbs wide, and the first gold-tipped leaves of autumn catch the faint light. The morning chorus of birds is gentle, not loud, the intermittent plink of a robin, the far-off cooing of a wood pigeon, the scratchy commentary of a wren in the undergrowth. They do not disturb the quiet, but rather seem part of it, like threads in a tapestry of stillness. After a few hundred yards, the track skirts a clearing where a charcoal hearth lies cool and abandoned from a previous burn. It is a circular platform of flattened, packed earth, perhaps 15 feet across, stained black and greasy with ash and creosote. Around the edge, fragments of white quartz are scattered, the stones the colliers used to cover the stack. The sharp scent of old, burnt wood hangs faintly still, mingling with the richer earth smell of leaf mold, and you note without stopping that the hearth is tidy, ready for the next load. This is the way of the Forest of Dean, no wild, unpeopled waste, but a fabric of working places, each with its own quiet rhythm, charcoal hearths, iron mines, bloomery furnaces, all stitched together by the narrow tracks like the one you walk. It is a landscape made by hands, and the hands are never far away. Even now, as you pass, you might see the smoke of another cottage, dim and distant through the trees, or hear the distant tap of a miner's hammer on stone, carried by the still air from half a mile off, a sound so small it might be a woodpecker at work. The track drops gently, and you enter a deeper part of the woodland where holly grows thick and glossy, its leaves so dark a green they appear almost black in the dim light. Ferns of the summer, now browning, droop across the path and brush against your breeches, depositing tiny droplets of dew that soak into the wool. Your left hand reaches out habitually to touch the rough bark of a beech tree as you pass, the bark smooth and grey like the skin of an elephant in a picture book, though you have never seen such a thing. It is cool and damp, and your fingers come away smelling faintly of moss. You pause once, not to rest, but to let a fallow deer that you did not see at first slip away noiselessly between the trees, a dun shape that melts into the duns and browns of the forest. You watch it go without thought, simply noticing the movement, then walk on. The brook makes itself known before you see it. It is a low sound at first, a murmur under the silence, then a distinct liquid note, a gentle chattering over stones that grows as the path leads down. You know this brook well. It rises in a spring 1.5 miles to the north, near Speech House, and it runs southeast through alder and willow, never deep, never fast, but always present. Its water is brown with the peat of the high forest, though clean and cold. When you reach it, the track crosses it at a shallow ford, where a bed of flat stones has been laid across the stream, and the water flows around and over them in a thin, glassy sheet. You step carefully from stone to stone, your hobnails giving a good grip, and pause mid-crossing to look down at the water flowing over the gravel, the tiny particles of mica, sparkling even in the low light. A water insect, a skater, dimples the surface, and scoots under the bank. You let a handful of water trickle from your bottle, refill it with fresh from the stream just above the ford, and then cross to the other side. Here the track climbs a little, then levels out into a wider ride, an old man-made cutting through the trees that was perhaps once a boundary, marked by a split oak that leans heavily, half its roots exposed. You know from this leaning oak that the Bloomery is 10 minutes' walk ahead. The mist is thinning further, now only the very faintest veil moving just above the ground, and the sky above the tree-tops has turned the colour of pale whey. A thin bar of gold light, the first direct sun of the day, strikes the trunk of the leaning oak, picking out every furrow in the bark and turning the green moss to a brilliant emerald velvet. You stop, and from habit you look at that bar of light, noting that the sun's angle tells you it is perhaps a quarter-hour short of full dawn, the exact time when tradition says a furnace should be lit if the smelt is to run its course by evening. The timing pleases you in the calm, unspoken way that a familiar task aligns with the world's turning. Around the next bend, the coppiced areas give way to an open blade, a place where the tree canopy breaks and lets in a wide, soft sky. This is the Bloomery site. It is a place of simple order, where human hands have kept the wildness at a respectful distance, not driven it away. The furnace itself stands at the glade's far edge, a low, beehive-shaped shaft built from slabs of local sandstone, grey and ochre, stuck together with a daub of red clay mixed with chopped straw. It rises just over 5 feet, its top rim blackened, and from the base on one side protrudes a single clay pipe, the tire with its mouth sloping down to the ground. Beside it, a pair of wooden bellows rest on a frame of rough alder poles, their leather bags darkened and creased like old skin. The bellows lever, a long pole, is propped at rest, waiting. Under a simple 3-sided shelter, roofed with offcuts of bark, stand heaps of charcoal, graded by size, and a pile of iron ore, lumps of haematite, the color of dried blood, some still clotted with pale clay. A bank of tools leans against the shelter's post, 2 long-shanked iron tongs, a heavy hammer, several iron bars with flattened ends, a wooden scoop. Everything is still, cold, touched with dew. The grass around the furnace is trodden flat and marked with the black dust of charcoal, and a ring of scorched earth surrounds the mouth of the tire where slag once ran. You set down your water bottle and your food pouch on a flat stone that serves as a seat. The brook, the same one you crossed earlier, runs here too, curling around the edge of the glade and over a small gravel bank. Its sound a constant soft melody, a sound that underlies everything and will accompany the whole day. You walk slowly around the furnace, checking it as you always do. The clay lining is not cracked, the stones have not shifted, the tire is clear of old slag. You place your palm flat against the stone, feeling the cold and the faint texture of the grains under the patina of soot. The furnace has been cool for 3 days since the last smelt, and it is ready. Now you stand for a while, not doing, just being. You look up through the break in the canopy to where the sky is lightening to a soft, watery blue, and you watch a single rook flap slowly overhead, its wings making a sound like a cloth being shaken. You listen to the brook, to the breeze that now stirs the higher leaves, to the far-off and intermittent sound of a pig rooting somewhere on the forest mast, a sound so vague it is almost memory. The air smells of damp earth, of water, of the faint sharpness of charcoal, of the sweet rot of late bracken. The world is balanced, untroubled, and in this pause before lighting the fire you feel a deep and quiet ease, a sense that you are exactly where you should be, a link in a chain of smelters that runs back into a past so deep no one knows its start, and forward into a future you will never see, but the work will continue. You pick up the wooden scoop, heft it in your hand, and turn toward the charcoal heap. The day begins. You stand in the glade with the wooden scoop still in your hand, not yet moving toward the charcoal, because the furnace itself asks to be seen first, to be looked over as you might look over a sleeping animal before waking it. The Bloomery is a squat, rounded shaft, not perfectly cylindrical, but slightly wider at the base, tapering as it rises to a rough opening at the top that is blackened by old smoke. Its stones are local sandstone, gathered from the forest floor or pried from shallow quarries where the rock breaks in flat slabs. Each piece has its own character. Some are a pale grey with a faint bluish tint, others a warm ochre that seems to hold light even now, and a few are streaked with iron staining like rust, weeping through the grain. The stones are not dressed smooth, but left with their natural faces, their edges chipped to fit together with a kind of patient understanding. Between them, the daub of red clay mixed with chopped straw fills the gaps, pushed in by thumbs long ago and hardened by the heat of countless smelts until it is like fired brick. In places, the daub has cracked in fine hairline patterns, a web of tiny fissures that do not weaken the structure, only show its age and the many cycles of heating and cooling it has endured. You reach out and touch one of these cracks, tracing it with a fingertip, and the surface is cool and slightly rough, like the skin of an old tree. The furnace sits on a low platform of packed earth and crushed slag, a dark, glassy rubble that crunches softly underfoot. This platform raises at a hand's breadth above the surrounding grass, enough to keep the base dry when the brook rises after heavy rain. At the furnace foot, on the side facing the bellows frame, a small arch opens into the interior, an opening no larger than a man's head and shoulders, its edges plastered with extra clay that has vitrified into a dark, glassy crust. This is where the bloom will be drawn out at the day's end, but now it is empty and dark, a mouth closed in sleep. You stoop slightly to peer inside, and the cavity within is a dim shape, smelling of old charcoal dust and a faint metallic tang, the ghost of iron past. A thin scattering of fine grey ash lies on the floor of the hearth, and a single small slag dribble, cooled weeks ago into a twisted, blackened lump, not much bigger than a thumbnail, still clings to the side. Everything is still, cold, waiting. You straighten and walk slowly around to the far side where the tire pipe protrudes. This is the lung of the furnace, a tube of baked clay that enters the stone wall near the base and angles downward, its outer end flared into a shallow dish shape to receive the nozzle of the bellows. The clay is a different color from the daub, a pale buff with darker scorch marks radiating from the inner opening where the forced air will soon enter. You run a thumb around the rim. It is smooth, glazed in places by the heat of former smelts, and the bore is clear of obstructions. That is a small but important check, a thing done without thought now, though once it was a lesson learned. A smear of old beeswax, used to seal the joint between tire and bellows nozzle, remains on the outer dish, sticky and gritty with charcoal dust. Nearby, resting on two forked sticks driven into the ground, lies the iron tapping bar, a rod as long as your arm with a flattened, chisel-like end, used to open the slag hole when it is time. Its surface is dark, with a patina of fire scale, smooth from many hands, and it points slightly downward so that rain will not cool in the end. You next turn to the bellows, for while the furnace is the body, the bellows are the breath. They rest on a frame of older poles, rough-barked and joined with wooden pegs, its legs sunk firmly into the earth. The bellows themselves are two large leather bags, each shaped like a long teardrop, sewn from thick ox hide with the hair still on in patches, the stitches of waxed linen cord tight and regular. The leather is a deep brown black, creased and supple from years of flexing, and when you press a hand gently against one bag it yields with a soft sigh of air through the nozzle, confirming that the inner valves are still sound. The top side of each bag is fitted with a wooden board, plank cut from a single piece of beech, and to these boards a long pole is attached with leather hinges. This is the lever, the working beam that you or the apprentice will push down or lift to fill and squeeze the bags in steady alternation. At rest the lever slopes upward at a shallow angle, its far end resting in a forked support post lined with greased wool to quiet the movement. The whole assembly smells of old leather, wood, and a faint animal scent of tallow, used to keep the hide supple, a smell that is not unpleasant, but simply familiar, part of the texture of this place. Beside the bellows, under the three-sided shelter, the piles of materials sit in orderly arrangement. The charcoal heap is the larger of the two, a dark mound that catches the light with a dull, velvety blackness. You know from yesterday morning's tally that this charcoal came from the colliers half a mile east, made from coppiced oak and alder cut the previous winter and burned slowly under a turf and earth cover for 4 days and nights. The lumps are irregular, some the size of your fist, others smaller, a few crumbling into shards and dust that the collier would call breeze. You can see the structure of the wood still in the larger pieces, the ghost of tree rings and medullary rays in fine relief, and when you pick up a lump and turn it over, the surfaces are brittle and porous, catching the light with a faint silvery sheen. It no longer smells of wood, but of something sharper, a clean, mineral scent, like the air after lightning, with an underlying sweetness. You place it down again carefully, setting it on the pile so that it will not roll, and the sound of its landing is a hollow clink, almost metallic. Next to the charcoal is the ore pile, and this is a different presence altogether. Heavier, denser, more of the earth than of the tree. The haematite lumps are a reddish brown, some so dark they look black until you pick them up and see the true color against the light, a deep rust red with occasional glints of a metallic gray where the surface is freshly broken. They are irregular in shape, knobbly, some rounded like river stones and others jagged with sharp corners where they were hammered from the vein. A few are still crusted with a pale, creamy clay from the mine, now dry and flaking, leaving ochre dust on your fingers. The ore is cold to the touch, colder than the air even, and surprisingly heavy for its size. A single lump the size of a hen's egg pulls noticeably at the hand. You pick up one piece, a particularly fine specimen with a little shelf of white quartz running through it, and weigh it in your palm, then set it back with the others. The ore pile contains perhaps 300 weight, enough for 2 smelts, and it has been washed already in the brook, so no loose clay remains to clog the furnace. The water droplets from that washing have long since dried, leaving the ore with a clean, slightly roughened surface that feels almost dusty. The tools leaning against the shelter post form a quiet collection of shapes, each with its own purpose, each worn to fit human use. The long-shanked iron tongs stand tallest, their handles thick and smoothly black, their gripping ends formed into 2 flat jaws that close with a gentle gap sized exactly to hold the bloom. Close to them, the heavy hammer, its head a block of solid iron, with a square face polished from countless blows, its handle of ashwood, darkened with sweat and soot. Beside it rest 2 iron bars with flattened ends used for breaking open the furnace front when the smelt is done, and a smaller hammer for tapping slag. The wooden scoop in your hand is made from a single piece of beech, its bowl worn thin at the lip from scraping against stone and charcoal. You run your thumb over that thin edge, feeling the smoothness, the slight depression where your grip always falls. All these tools are clean and dry, placed at the exact angle they were left after the last smelt, ready to be taken up again without thought or search. Everything in the glade seems to hold its breath. The grass around the furnace is still bent from yesterday's dew, each blade bearing a tiny shrinking droplet of water that catches the growing light and turns it into a spark of silver before it vanishes. The brook continues its endless murmur, a background of liquid notes that you have already stopped noticing, so that it is less a sound and more a texture of the quiet. Occasionally a leaf drifts down from the canopy, a single yellowing oak leaf spinning lazily as it falls, its edges slightly curled, landing without noise on the packed earth. The air is still cool enough that when you exhale, a faint mist shapes briefly before your face and then is gone. You watch that happen once, then a second time, observing the small cloud appear and dissolve as if measuring the temperature with your own breath. The sky above the gap in the canopy has turned from pale way to a soft, milky blue, and though the sun is not yet visible above the tree line, its light now touches the uppermost twigs of the tallest birch on the glade's eastern side, turning them a bright, almost white gold. You walk a slow circle around the entire working area, noting the small things that another person might miss. There is a neat pile of slag to one side, the debris of previous smelts, dark, glassy, bubbled masses that look like frozen lava, their sharp edges dulled by weather. They will be used eventually to build up the platform or to pack around the furnace base for insulation. Near the slag is a small ring of stones around a bed of ashes, the remains of a small warming fire where you sometimes heat a pot of food or dry your boots. A roughly hewn log serves as a seat, its upper surface worn smooth by use, and beside it grows a clump of wood sorrel, its 3 lobed leaves folded down against the night chill, now slowly unfurling as the light increases. You notice these things without any sense of urgency, the way you might notice the arrangement of furniture in your own cottage, a natural familiarity that needs no comment. You return to the furnace and place your palm flat against the stone again. It is still cold, but perhaps a shade less cold than before, as if the first week sun has just begun to draw out the night. You lean closer and smell the opening at the top, a faint, clean scent of old charcoal and clay, with a trace of something metallic, like a copper coin held in a warm hand. You can feel the weight of the furnace now, not just its physical mass, but the weight of its purpose, the potential sleeping in the stone. In a short while, you will wake it. But for now, the stillness is complete, a perfect pause in which nothing is expected and nothing is lacking. The bellows do not move, the charcoal does not burn, the ore does not change, and you are simply a figure in the glade, breathing slowly, feeling the cool air on your cheeks and the solid ground under your boots. Off to the south, beyond the screen of alder that lines the brook, you hear the soft knock of a woodpecker, a distant tapping that stops, starts again, stops. The brook chatters over its bed, and somewhere a smaller bird, a chiff-chaff or a wren, calls a single repeated note. These sounds do not break the quiet so much as trace its outline, like stitches on a plain cloth. The mist is now entirely gone, drawn away into the higher air, and the forest around you is revealed in all its deep, layered green and brown. You look down at your own hands, the hands that will do this day's work, and see the charcoal dust already worked into the halls of your fingertips. The small white scar on the knuckle of your left thumb from a glancing hammer struck many years ago, the way the skin has thickened over the palm from handling rough ore and tong handles. These hands know the furnace, and the furnace knows them, and in the quiet they seem to wait for each other. A slight breeze moves through the glade, just enough to stir the leaves of the holly and to bring with it the faint, sweet smell of the forest beyond, of damp earth and leaf mold, and the distant suggestion of wood smoke from some other cottage. The breeze touches the surface of the brook, catching a patch of water and turning it into a brief shimmer of silver scales before vanishing. You watch it pass, feeling it lift a stray strand of hair from your brow and cool the skin there. Then the breeze dies back, and the world settles once more into its held silence. The furnace stands dark against the pale early light, the bellows ready, the ore and charcoal waiting in their separate piles. You remain there unhurried, absorbing the completeness of the moment, knowing that the fire will come soon enough, but that this pause is also part of the work, a kind of listening to the things that do not speak, a long, slow match of breath to the breathing of the forest before the breath becomes fire. And then you turn to the charcoal heap, and the waiting is over, though nothing in the glade has changed except the angle of your thought. The charcoal pile stands dark under the bark-roofed shelter, its outline soft and irregular like a crouching animal settled for the day. You move toward it with the wooden scoop still in your hand, your boots making that familiar soft crunch on the packed earth and crushed slag that surrounds the furnace. The light has grown stronger now, though the sun itself remains behind the eastern tree line, a pale gold wash that touches the topmost fronds of the bracken and begins to pick out the individual lumps in the charcoal mound, giving each a faint silvery edge. You kneel down on one knee beside the heap, feeling the cool of the ground through the leather and wool, and set the scoop on the earth within easy reach. The charcoal waits, dark and lightless, 1,000 pieces of former forest made small. You reach forward and pick up a single lump, the first one that comes to hand. It is about the size of a man's fist, irregular and knobbly, with a surface that catches the skin of your fingers with a slight gritty drag. The charcoal is light, far lighter than stone of the same size, and it carries within it the memory of the oak branch from which it came. You can see the structure clearly, the long lines of the grain, the tiny pores where water once moved upward from root to leaf, the concentric ghost of a year's growth. All of this has been preserved by the slow, airless burning in the collier's mound, a transformation that drove out the water and the volatile spirit and left only the clean black carbon, a skeleton of wood that will burn again, but hotter and cleaner than the living branch ever could. You turn the lump over in your palm, and a fine black dust transfers to your skin, working into the creases and the holes, a stain that will not wash out entirely for days, a mark of the work. This particular lump is good, solid, with no soft crumbly heart and no excessive cracks. You place it carefully into the scoop, where it makes a quiet, hollow sound, and reach for another. The second lump is slightly larger, and it has a different feel. Where the first was dense for charcoal, this one is more open, the wood structure less compact, the pores larger and more widely spaced, indicating a faster-grown tree, perhaps an alder from a wetter part of the forest. It is still perfectly serviceable because the Bloomery furnace can use a range of charcoals, but you know from experience that a mix of dense and open pieces makes for an even heat, the denser wood burning longer and the open wood catching quickly to keep the fire lively. You place it in the scoop beside the first, and the two settle together with a faint click. Already a small accumulation has begun. the start of the first charge of the day, and you work on without haste, picking up lump after lump, turning each in your fingers, feeling its weight, checking for any stone or clay accidentally picked up from the collier's hearth and mixed with the char. Once you find a small piece of white quartz no bigger than a thumbnail, a fragment from the earth covering of the charcoal burn, and you set it aside on the ground, where it glitters faintly. Another time you find a lump that is too soft, more breeze than true charcoal, and it crumbles when you squeeze it, leaving only a handful of black grit that sifts through your fingers back onto the pile. These small discriminations are automatic, performed by hands that have done this 10,000 times, that know the rightness of a good piece of char, the way a cook knows the rightness of dough, by its spring under the thumb. The charcoal has a smell, and kneeling here so close to the pile you are enveloped in it. It is a clean smell, dry and sharp at the same time, like the scent of an old fire that has been rained on and dried again, but with an underlying sweetness that belongs only to charcoal, a note that is almost like the heartwood of cedar, though there is no cedar in the forest of Dean. It is not an unpleasant smell, and it has come to mean, for you, the start of work, the anticipation of heat, the point at which preparation turns into doing. You breathe it in deeply without thinking, and the scent settles in the back of your nose and stays there, as familiar as the smell of your own cottage hearth. The bird song from the surrounding trees dims and returns in soft waves, as if even the birds are still half waking, their calls spaced out and unhurried, matching your own slow rhythm. When the scoop is reasonably full, a rounded heap of perhaps 20 good lumps of charcoal, you rise from your kneeling position, your knee making a slight popping sound, and you carry the scoop over to the mouth of the furnace. Here at the base you crouch again and tip the charcoal carefully into the dark interior, where it tumbles down onto the hearth bed with a sound like a distant rock slide, a hollow clatter that echoes faintly up the shaft. This is not the charge that will burn for the smelt, not yet. This is simply the foundation, the preheating layer that will ensure the first ore does not fall onto cold earth. You return to the pile and fill the scoop a second time, and then a third, each load carried with the same careful stride, each tipped with the same deliberate rotation of the wrist, and with each load the furnace base fills a little more, until at last you can see through the tie air opening that the charcoal now sits level with the bottom edge of the air pipe. A dark, silent bed waiting for its first spark. You straighten, brush the charcoal dust from your palms onto the sides of your breeches, and take a step back to breathe for a moment, looking at the furnace, the now half-emptied scoop, the pile still waiting under the shelter. The first small step is done, and nothing yet has changed except that the furnace has a mouthful of fuel, sleeping. Now you turn to the ore. The pile sits a few feet to the left of the charcoal, a low mound of reddish-brown hematite lumps, each one dense and heavy with the weight of iron, each one a piece of the forest of Dean's deep body. This ore came from a mine not 2 miles from here, a shallow pit dug into the limestone where the iron-rich rock lies in a band between paler strata. The miners, free miners of the Dean with their ancient rights, broke it out with picks and hammers, hauled it up in wicker baskets, and piled it at the pit mouth to be salted and washed before it came to you. You trade charcoal for it, or you pay in small coin, or more often you are simply part of the long chain of mutual obligation that ties the forest people together. The collier giving to the smelter giving to the smith giving to the nailer, and so on, in a quiet web of exchange that binds the forest community without need of written contracts or loud agreement. You approach the ore pile and kneel again, though this time with a different kind of attention, because the ore is less forgiving than charcoal, heavier, harder, less yielding to the hand. You pick up a single lump, the first one, and its weight immediately pulls against your wrist, a surprising heft for something smaller than your fist. The hematite is the color of dried blood, a deep brownish red that in faint light looks almost black, and it has a dull, matte surface where it has weathered in the air, though where a corner has been freshly broken you can see a brighter, almost metallic grey that catches the light like polished lead. You turn it over, noting the shape, the slight cavities where softer minerals have weathered out, the vein of white calcite that runs like a frozen seam of fat across one face. This vein is not a problem. The furnace heat will drive it off as slag, but you register it. A small piece of information added to all the other small pieces you will accumulate as you build the charge. You continue to sort the ore, picking up each lump, turning it in your hand, and placing it into a separate pile beside you. This pile, the properly sized and cleaned ore ready for the furnace. The lumps that are too large you set aside for breaking with a hammer later. The few that are too small, mere shards and dust, you leave in the main pile, because dust in the furnace can clog the airflow and choke the smelt. This sorting is slower than the charcoal sorting, because each lump requires a moment of assessment. Its size gauged against your memory of countless good smelts, each of which succeeded because the ore was fed at the right size, roughly that of a hen's egg or a child's closed fist, small enough to heat through but large enough not to block the descent of the charge. A piece the size of a hen's egg will reduce evenly, its iron particles gathering into the bloom core while its impurities flow away as slag. A piece the size of a man's head would remain cold at the center and fail to yield its metal. This is a truth you learned as an apprentice from the old smelter whose place you took, and it lives now in your own hands and eyes. The ore has a smell too, quite different from the charcoal. It is a mineral smell, cold and slightly sharp, like the inside of a cave or a stream bed after rain, with a faint metallic tang that you can taste on the back of your tongue after handling it for a while. Some of the lumps, though still carrying their coat of pale limestone clay from the mine, give off a dusty, earthy scent when you rub them. A smell that reminds you of the deep pits, the underground dark where the miners work by the light of small oil lamps, their picks making a sound like a bell in the narrow tunnels. You have been down those mines, not often, but enough to know the feel of the rock walls, the cool drip of water, the way the haematite vein gleams in the lamplight like a band of congealed shadow. Now the ore is here on the surface in the open air, and you are the next link in its long journey from the earth's crust to the smith's hammer, the nail, the horseshoe, the hinge of a cottage door. A particular lump catches your attention. A piece with a high iron content that shows on its fresh face as a brilliant metallic grey, almost silver, with a weight that seems disproportionate to its size. This is good ore, rich ore, the kind that the miners call kidney ore because of its rounded, smooth shape, and you place it gently on the ready pile with a sense of quiet satisfaction, a feeling too small to be called happiness, but larger than mere approval. You know that this piece will give up its iron easily, melting into the bloom almost whole. Beside it you place another and another, the pile growing slowly as the charcoal pile had grown, a steady accumulation of selected, considered fragments that will together make something new. The light continues to change while you work, the sun now fully risen above the tree line, though still low, spilling a soft golden light across the glade that catches the brook and turns it into a ribbon of shifting brightness. The grass blades hold no more dew, dry now and stirring slightly in the small breeze that has begun to move more steadily through the canopy. You feel the warmth of the sun on the back of your neck, where your felt hat shades your face but leaves your collar exposed, and it is a gentle warmth, not hot, just enough to take the edge from the morning chill and to remind you that the day is advancing, that the next stage of the work will call for fire. But there is no hurry, and you continue with the ore, lifting, examining, placing, until the pile of ready ore stands at a neat mound of perhaps 24 pieces, enough for the first several charges of the smelt. Now you stand, your back straightening with a slight ache that is not unpleasant, the ache of muscles used in the familiar way, and you carry the ready ore over to the furnace side, placing it on a flat stone near the bellows where you can reach it easily when the time comes. You do the same with the rest of the prepared charcoal, ferrying scoop after scoop across the few yards of trodden earth until a good supply stands within arm's reach of the furnace mouth. Everything is in its place, the materials arrayed in quiet order, the tools standing ready, the furnace cold but no longer empty, its belly filled with the dark bed of charcoal that will receive the first flame. You take your water bottle from the flat stone where you left it, uncork the stopper, and drink. The brook water cool and tasting of the forest, of moss and stone, and the faint sweetness of alder roots. You recork it, set it down, and stand for a long moment looking at the furnace, at the glade, at the sky, which is now a soft, high blue with small clouds moving slowly from the west, clouds that will not bring rain, but that will occasionally dim the sun and then pass, giving the day a gentle rhythm of light and shade. The birds have woken fully now, and their calls are more frequent, more various, though still soft, still held within the quiet of the forest. You are ready, the furnace is ready, and the next thing is the fire. You stand for a while longer beside the furnace, letting the quiet settle around you like a second skin, the kind of quiet that comes only when a task is about to begin, and no part of you is rushed. The sky is fully open now, a pale blue with a few thin clouds stretched lightly like combed wool, and the sun has climbed enough to touch the stone of the furnace with a faint warmth, though the interior remains dark and cold as the earth below the grass. You set down the scoop, flex your fingers once, and then turn your attention to a small pile of dry kindling that you keep under a piece of oiled canvas tucked behind the bellows frame. This kindling, gathered over the past weeks from the forest floor, consists of small dead twigs, no thicker than your little finger, broken into short lengths and mixed with a handful of dry oak leaves that crinkle when you touch them. Their brown surface is brittle and veined like old parchment. You lift the canvas and take out a good double handful, placing the bundle on the flat stone beside the furnace mouth. Next to the kindling you lay a small lump of charred linen cloth, saved from an old shirt that had worn past mending, and a palm-sized piece of true tinder, a dry, spongy mass of cramball fungus cut from a dead ash tree the previous autumn, its surface black and hard like charcoal, but its interior a soft, velvety brown that will catch a spark and hold it with a slow, almost invisible heat. You kneel at the furnace mouth, the front arch that opens into the low hearth chamber, and you reach inside with one arm, your sleeve brushing against the clay and charcoal-dusted stone. The interior is still as you left it, the bed of charcoal lumps from your earlier preparation lying in a loose, dark layer. With your fingertips, you clear a small space at the very center, pushing aside a few lumps to create a shallow depression no larger than a dinner plate, the floor of which is the packed earth and crushed slag of the furnace base. The charcoal grates softly as it moves, the sound absorbed by the thick walls so that it seems to come from far away. Into this hollow you place the piece of cramball fungus, setting it gently like an egg into a nest. Then you arrange a few shreds of the charred linen cloth over and around it, fluffing the fibers so that they stand up in a fine, airy web. On top of this you build a tiny teepee of the smallest twigs, each one selected for its thinness, its dryness, the way it snaps cleanly when bent between thumb and forefinger. You add a few more twigs, slightly thicker, leaning them against the first so that the structure is stable but open, with plenty of space for air to move. Finally, you drape a handful of the dry oak leaves over the top where they rustle and settle, their curled edges touching the twigs like tiny papery hands. You sit back on your heels and look at the little construction through the archway, a dark shape within a darker shape, the whole thing no bigger than a wren's nest, and yet carrying within it the seed of a heat that will soon rise to 1200 degrees and more, enough to melt stone, enough to turn ore into iron. The thought does not excite you. It simply is, a fact as ordinary as the brook's flow or the mist's retreat, and you reach for the small leather pouch that hangs at your belt, the one that holds your striker light. The pouch is soft and worn, its drawstring pulled tight, and inside are three things: a curved steel striker in the shape of a narrow crescent, its surface dark with a fine rust bloom that comes off on your fingers as a faint orange dust, a piece of good English flint, dark grey with a sharp edge that glitters when you turn it, and a few scraps of charred cloth, replacements for the tinder. You take out the striker and flint and set the pouch aside. Now you hold the flint in your left hand, the striker in your right, and you lean close to the furnace mouth, close enough that you feel the cool air issuing from the dark interior like a slow exhalation against your cheek. You position the flint just above the tinder bundle, angled so that the sparks will fall directly into the web of charred cloth and fungus. Then you strike. The motion is simple, a quick downward scrape of the steel across the sharp edge of the flint, and it produces a small shower of orange sparks, tiny molten flecks of steel that fly outward and die in the air. You strike again, adjusting the angle slightly, and this time one spark lands squarely on the charred cloth and glows for a brief moment, a point of orange that fades almost immediately. You wait a breath, then strike a third time, and now a spark catches true, a small ember, that holds and spreads, its orange deepening to a steady, pulsing red as it feeds on the cloth. You lower the flint and striker to the ground and cup your hands gently around the tinder, bringing your face close and blowing with the softest possible breath. A long, slow stream of air that you direct at the center of the ember. The glow brightens, the red climbing toward yellow, and a tiny wisp of smoke curls upward through the twig teepee. So faint, it might only be a shadow moving. You blow again, a little stronger now, and the smoke thickens, and with a soft, almost inaudible flump, the cramp ball fungus catches and a small flame appears. A tongue of blue and gold that licks upward and sets the nearest oak leaf into a brief, bright flare. The fire is born. It is still tiny, a mere handful of light in the darkness of the furnace belly, but it is alive and growing, and you watch it for a long moment without doing anything else, simply observing as the flame spreads from leaf to twig, the dry wood beginning to pop and crackle in a small, busy voice. The sound is delicate, like the snapping of tiny bones, and it echoes up through the shaft above in a way that makes the furnace seem to breathe with the fire. A thin column of smoke now rises from the top opening, pale grey against the blue sky, twisting slightly in the breezeless air before dispersing into nothing. The scent of the smoke is different from the cold charcoal smell, warmer and more pungent, with a faint resinous note from the oak twigs, and it drifts across the glade and mingles with the smell of the brook and the damp earth. You remain on your knees, not moving, letting the fire establish itself, because rushing this part would smother the flames as surely as pouring water on them. So you wait, and the fire grows, the twigs catching one after another, the teepee collapsing inward to form a small bed of coals that glows with a deep internal red. When the first small twigs have burned down to embers and the flame is beginning to lick at the thicker pieces you placed around the outside, you judge that the moment has come for the first true fuel. You reach to the pile of charcoal you set aside earlier, the smaller lumps and broken pieces that you selected for this very purpose, and you take a single piece between your fingers. It is a flat fragment no larger than a walnut, its edges sharp, and you place it gently on top of the burning kindling, resting it on the brightest part of the ember bed. The charcoal sits there for a moment unchanged, then a faint blue flame appears at its edge, and the surface begins to glow, small orange sparks dancing across it like insects. You add another piece and another, building a loose pile over the fire, and with each addition the glow deepens and spreads, the charcoal pieces themselves becoming part of the fire rather than feeding it from above. The smoke changes, losing its resinous quality and becoming the cleaner, sharper smoke of charcoal, almost invisible except for the shimmer of heat above the furnace top. You sit back on your heels and wait again, letting the charcoal catch fully. Because charcoal is strange in its burning, it gives no flame of its own, but glows with a deep, penetrating heat that soaks into everything around it, and if you add too much too soon, the lower pieces will be smothered and the fire will go cold. So you add in slow, patient increments, one lump, then a pause, then another lump, watching the color of the glow, feeling the heat now beginning to press against your face each time you lean close. The heat is still gentle, a warmth like the sun on a spring day, rather than the furnace's full fury, but it is a real heat, and you can feel the furnace walls beginning to respond, the stones near the base losing their morning chill and growing faintly warm to the touch. You place your palm against one of the larger stones and hold it there, feeling the warmth seep through the grit of old soot, a warmth that is still distant, still contained, but unmistakable. The clay daub that fills the joints between the stones smells differently when warm, giving off a faint earthy scent like a field after light rain, and you notice this without comment, filing it away with all the other small signals that tell you the furnace is alive and behaving as it should. Through the tie-air opening, you can see the glow of the fire reflected on the inner wall, a dim orange that flickers gently as the charcoal settles and shifts. Now you begin to add charcoal in larger quantities, not the small fragments but the full-sized lumps, the ones you sorted earlier for the main charge. You take them one at a time from the pile near the furnace mouth and drop them through the top opening this time, because the fire is now strong enough that the fall of a lump from above will not disturb it, but will simply settle into the growing bed and catch in its own time. Each lump makes a soft thud as it lands, and through the tie-air you can see a brief dimming of the glow as the new piece blocks the light, then a slow brightening as it begins to burn from beneath. The process is slow and repetitive, The same motion of hand to pile, lift, drop, pause, repeated without counting, without hurry, the rhythm of it becoming almost like the rhythm of the brook, a steady, ongoing flow that needs no thought. You add perhaps 20 lumps this way, building up the firebed until it rises halfway up the furnace shaft, a deep, living mass of heat that pulses with its own internal currents, the air moving upward through the interstices of the charcoal in invisible streams, the carbon burning to carbon dioxide, and then, higher up where the oxygen is less, to carbon burning to carbon dioxide, and then, higher up where the oxygen is less, to carbon monoxide, the reducing gas that will do the real work of transforming the earth. What was a light crackle becomes a low, steady roar, a sound like a distant waterfall or a strong wind in winter trees, the sound of air being drawn in through the tuyere by the rising heat, the natural draft of the shaft pulling oxygen through the fire. You can hear it most clearly if you put your ear near the tuyere opening, where the air enters with a soft sigh, a constant inward breath that feeds the flames. The top of the furnace now glows with a visible orange light, and the smoke that issues from it is thin and blue, barely visible against the sky, a sign of complete combustion, a clean burn. The heat is strong enough now that you cannot stand too close to the furnace mouth without shielding your face, so you take a step back and let the fire do its work, watching from a small distance, your arms folded, the wooden scoop tucked under one elbow. The glade around you has responded to the fire in small, quiet ways. The birds, which had been growing more active, have fallen silent in the immediate vicinity, though you can still hear them singing further off in the trees where the heat does not reach. A grey squirrel that had been foraging near the brook has retreated to a high branch of the leaning oak, its tail flicking with a mild, unconcerned curiosity. The light from the furnace top throws a faint, dancing orange onto the underside of the canopy leaves above, a glow that is invisible in full sunlight but would be bright against the dark if this were night. You have seen that glow on many late evenings, the furnace lit and the forest around it a dome of flickering light, and it is a familiar comfort, a sign of working progress, of the iron being made while the world sleeps. But now it is morning, and the light is only a faint supplement to the sun, a warmth among warmth. You walk a slow circuit around the furnace now, checking that nothing has shifted, that the bellows are still properly positioned, that the tuyere is clear. The tuyere opening, through which the natural draft now flows, has a small rim of white ash forming around it, a soft, feathery deposit that you brush away with a finger. The air that enters is cool in contrast to the furnace heat, and you can feel the temperature gradient as you move your hand from the warm stone to the cooler tuyere lip, a boundary between the outer world and the inner fire. The bellows wait patiently, their leather bags slack, their levers still at rest, because for now the natural draft is enough, and the forced air will not be needed until the ore is in and the real work of reduction begins. That moment is approaching, but it is not yet here, and you allow the furnace this time to build its heat, to stabilize, to become a steady, reliable heart of fire that will receive the ore without shock. The sun is climbing toward mid-morning, and the light in the glade is clear and bright, the shadows shortening, the brook still chattering over its stones with its endless, patient voice. You take up your water bottle again and drink, then pour a little water onto your palm and rub it across the back of your neck, the coolness a brief relief from the radiating heat of the furnace. You wipe your hands on your breeches and look at the piles of ore and charcoal waiting beside the shelter, the neat mounds of material that will now begin their journey into the fire. The furnace top glows steadily, its deep orange light a promise of the heat within, and the low roar of the draft is a constant undertone, a sound that will accompany the rest of the day as familiar as your own heartbeat. You are ready for the next step, the first feeding of the ore. But first you stand still for a moment longer, letting the warmth soak into your bones, watching the thin blue smoke rise into the sky, and feeling the deep, slow satisfaction of a fire well lit, a foundation well laid, a task begun in the only way it should be begun. Quietly, patiently, and without haste, the furnace breathes its low, steady roar into the glade, a sound that has already become part of the morning, as natural now as the brook's murmur or the rustle of the canopy. You stand with your back to the sun, feeling its warmth on your shoulders through the wool of your doublet, and you look at the glowing mouth at the top of the shaft, that circle of deep orange light that pulses gently with each passage of air through the charcoal bed. The fire has been burning for perhaps half an hour now, long enough that the furnace walls are thoroughly warm, the stones giving off their own stored heat, the clay dar baked hard and smelling of hot earth. The time for the first charge has come, and you feel it not as a decision but as a recognition, the same way you know when bread is ready to come from the oven or when a joint of meat has cooked through. A sense born of many repetitions and many small adjustments stored in the body rather than the mind. You pick up the wooden scoop, its beechwood bowl dark with years of use, the rim worn thin and smooth as a river stone. In your other hand you take up the long-handled iron shovel, its blade a flat rectangle of dark metal, its shaft of ash polished by the sliding grip of your palms. These two tools are the instruments of the charge, the scoop for the ore, the shovel for the charcoal, and you will use them in alternation for the next several hours, a rhythm that will become as steady and unthinking as walking or breathing, a pattern that will carry the furnace through its transformation. You move to the pile of ready charcoal that you have placed within arm's reach of the furnace, and with the shovel you lift a good load, perhaps a dozen fist-sized lumps, the iron blade sliding easily under the dark heap with a soft crunch. You carry the shovel to the furnace top and tip it carefully, letting the charcoal slide off in a controlled fall, the lumps tumbling down through the orange glow and landing on the established firebed with a series of soft, hollow thuds that reverberate up the shaft. The glow dims for a moment as the fresh charcoal settles, then brightens again as the heat finds the new fuel, and a fresh column of thin blue smoke rises into the sky, twisting once before, straightening upward in the still air. Now you set down the shovel and take up the scoop, turning to the pile of sized ore that you prepared earlier, the lumps of haematite the color of dried blood and old rust, each one about the size of a hen's egg, each one cleaned and sorted. You fill the scoop not quite to the brim, a measured load of perhaps 8 or 10 pieces, their combined weight pulling on your arm with that familiar heaviness that speaks of iron content, of the metal sleeping within the stone. You carry the scoop to the furnace top, and here you pause for just a moment, looking down into the glowing shaft, seeing the charcoal bed below, a living mass of orange and gold with darker patches where the fresh charcoal has not yet fully caught. Then you tip the scoop, and the ore falls. It falls in a brief, rattling cascade, the heavy lumps striking the charcoal with a sharper sound than the charcoal made, a sound that is almost metallic even now, as if the ore is already singing its future. The lumps scatter across the firebed, some settling into gaps, others resting on top of the charcoal, their dark surfaces immediately beginning to absorb the heat, to change color, to start the long, slow process of reduction. This is the pattern, and you settle into it without any need for conscious thought. Another shovel of charcoal tipped carefully over the ore to cover it, to create a new layer, then back to the scoop for another load of ore. The charcoal provides the heat and the carbon, the gas that will strip the oxygen from the iron oxide, leaving behind the pure metal. The ore provides the iron, the purpose of the whole endeavor. Each layer is a thin sandwich, charcoal and ore, building up slowly within the shaft, and you work with a steady, unhurried pace, your body moving between the piles and the furnace top in a gentle circuit, the same motions repeated again and again, the only variation being the slight adjustments of amount, a little more charcoal if a piece of ore is particularly large, a little less if the last shovel load seemed onerous. These adjustments are made without calculation, the hands knowing what the mind does not need to articulate. The furnace responds to each charge with a change in its voice. When you add charcoal, the sound deepens, the roar growing richer as the fresh fuel catches and the draft strengthens. When you add ore, the sound changes again, becoming slightly muffled, the ore absorbing heat and creating a temporary check on the fire's enthusiasm. Then, as the ore heats through and the charcoal around it continues to burn, the sound returns to its full voice, and you know that the charge is settling properly, that the materials are finding their place in the column of fire. This call and response, the quiet conversation between the smelter and the furnace, is the heart of the work, and you listen to it as you might listen to a familiar song, not attending to every note but aware of the whole shape, ready to notice if something goes off key. The sun climbs higher, and the glade warms. The light that falls on your shoulders loses its gentleness and becomes a steady heat, a counterpoint to the fiercer heat that radiates from the furnace every time you approach the top to tip another load. You feel sweat beginning to gather under your felt hat, a thin line of moisture at the hairline that trickles occasionally down your temple, and you wipe it away with the back of your hand, leaving a small smear of charcoal dust on your skin. The dust is on everything now, a fine black powder that settles on your clothing, your hands, your face, the wooden scoop and the iron shovel, the flat stones around the furnace, even the nearby grass blades that bend under its weight and turn a darker green. It is a clean dust, though, a dust of wood and fire rather than of earth, and it does not clog or choke, but simply marks a soft patina of the work. You pause after perhaps the 6th or 7th charge, stepping back from the furnace and taking up your water bottle. The water is still cool, the leather bottle having kept its temperature through the morning, and you drink deeply, feeling the liquid pass down your throat and spread through your chest, a small, private refreshment. You look at the furnace top, where the glow is now a deeper, more intense orange, almost white at the very center where the heat is greatest, and you can feel the warmth radiating from the stones even at this small distance. Through the chillier opening, the natural draft still flows with a soft, steady sigh, drawing air into the fire, and you stoop to look through the opening, seeing the bright heart of the charcoal bed pulsing with each inward breath, the individual lumps of fuel standing out as darker shapes against the brilliant background, like islands in a sea of light. The ore that you have added is no longer visible as distinct lumps. It has been absorbed into the bed, buried under successive layers of charcoal, cooking in the reducing atmosphere, beginning its slow chemical change from haematite to iron, from stone to metal. You return to the work, and the rhythm takes you again. Shovel, scoop, tip, pause, shovel, scoop, tip, pause, shovel, scoop, tip, pause. The sound of the furnace is your companion, and the brook beneath it, and the occasional bird call from the trees, and the soft crunch of your own boots on the crushed slag. The world has contracted to this small glade, this circle of heat and light and quiet labor. Thoughts come and go without urgency. Small observations about the quality of a particular lump of ore, the way a fresh shovel of charcoal catches more quickly than the last, the faint smell of hot stone that is now mixed with the sharp charcoal scent. The smell of the furnace has evolved as the smelt progresses, losing the initial resinous quality of the kindling and gaining a minerally, almost sour note that you associate with the ore heating, the water and impurities being driven out. It is a complex smell, layered, and it fills the glade and drifts gently into the surrounding trees, announcing the work to any forest creature that passes. Occasionally you check the tire, and this is an important part of the rhythm, a small interruption that is not truly an interruption because it belongs within the larger pattern. You stoop to the opening, peer in at the fire, and if you see any accumulation of fine dust or small fragments that might have struck the airflow, you use a thin iron rod to clear it, pushing gently through the opening and wiggling the rod to dislodge any blockage. The obstruction, if there is one, breaks up and crumbles into the fire, and the draft strengthens immediately, the air rushing in with renewed energy. More often, there is no blockage, and your check is simply a confirmation, a moment of attention paid to the furnace's most delicate part. You also place your hand on the furnace wall from time to time, feeling the heat, gauging the progress of the smelt by the way the warmth has spread upward through the stones, the way the base is now almost too hot to touch for more than a few seconds, while the upper stones are still only gently warm. The heat gradient tells you that the fire bed is where it should be, concentrated in the lower half of the shaft, and that the upper layers of the charge are still cool, still waiting their turn to descend into the hottest zone as the charcoal below burns away and the whole column settles downward. The work continues, and the morning passes. You do not count the charges, though a part of you keeps a rough tally somewhere in the back of your awareness, a sense of how much ore has gone in and how much remains in the pile beside the shelter. The prepared ore pile is shrinking, the charcoal pile diminishing more slowly, and you know that soon you will need to pause and sort more of both, but that moment has not yet arrived, and you continue with the rhythm, your body moving in its steady circuit, the scoop rising and falling, the shovel sliding and lifting, the furnace accepting each offering with its deep, resonating voice. Your muscles have warmed fully now, and the work, though heavy, has become almost effortless, a kind of moving meditation in which the boundary between yourself and the task grows thin and porous, your arms an extension of the scoop and shovel, the furnace an extension of your will, the whole glade a single integrated process of transformation. At one point, a cloud passes before the sun, and the light in the glade softens, the shadows fading, the colors muting. The furnace glow, which in full sun was somewhat diminished, now stands out more vividly, a beacon of orange in the grade light, and you notice this change without pausing, your hands continuing their work even as your eyes register the shift. The cloud is a large one, and it takes perhaps 10 minutes to pass, during which time the air cools slightly and the breeze strengthens, carrying the furnace smoke away more rapidly across the treetops. Then the sun returns, and the glade brightens again, and the heat on your shoulders resumes, and you wipe another trickle of sweat from your brow. The brook, unchanged by cloud or sun, continues its endless commentary, a silver thread of sound that runs beneath everything. Now the furnace shaft is filling, the column of alternating charcoal and ore rising slowly toward the top, and the heat within is intense and stable. The smoke that issues from the top opening has changed color slightly, from the pale blue of clean charcoal burning to a more yellowish tint, a sign that the ore is now adding its own contribution to the gases, the water, and volatile impurities being driven off and carried upward. You watch the smoke for a moment, noting the color, the thickness, the way it smells different now, more sulphurous, a faint acrid note that catches at the back of the throat. This is normal, expected, a sign that the smelt is progressing as it should. You continue to feed the furnace, and with each charge, the column settles a little, the charcoal burning down, the ore sinking into the hotter regions, and the whole mass descends in a slow, almost imperceptible movement that you cannot see but can feel in the way the top level drops between loads, requiring more charcoal, more ore, to keep it at the proper height. You step back again, setting down the scoop and shovel, and take a longer drink from your water bottle. Then pour a splash of water onto a rag and wipe your face and neck. The rag comes away blackened with charcoal dust and the fine orange powder of iron oxide, and you rinse it in the brook, watching the dark stain spread downstream and vanish. The brook water is cold on your fingers, startling after the long exposure to the furnace heat, and you let your hands rest in the flow for a moment, feeling the current push against your skin, the small pebbles of the stream bed smooth under your palms. You are perhaps a third of the way through the smelt now, the morning advancing toward noon, and the work still lies before you. But there is no weariness in this realization, only a calm acceptance, a willingness to continue, to let the rhythm carry you forward. You dry your hands on your breeches, pick up the scoop and shovel, and turn back to the piles, the furnace glowing beside you like a faithful companion, its voice steady and reassuring, its heat a constant presence, its transformation ongoing, patient, and complete. The bellows have waited through the morning in patient stillness, their leather bags slack on the alder frame, their long lever propped at rest in its greased fork. Now, as the furnace column has risen and the ore has begun its deep descent through the heat, the moment arrives when the natural draft is no longer quite enough, when the firebed grows dense with partly reduced material, and the air needs a stronger push to reach every corner of the burning mass. You know this moment by the sound of the furnace, which has lost a little of its roaring edge, becoming slightly muffled, as if the fire is breathing through a thicker blanket. You also know it by the color of the smoke, which has shifted from pale blue to a more sluggish gray, a sign that combustion is not quite as complete as it was an hour ago. These are small signals, easy to miss if you are not listening, but you have been listening, and so you set down the scoop and shovel beside the furnace and turn to the bellows frame. The bellows frame stands on 4 legs of rough alder, the bark still on in curling strips, the wood greyed by weather. The 2 great leather bags hang side by side from the frame, their long teardrop shapes pointing toward the furnace, their nozzles converging into a single clay pipe that fits into the flared mouth of the tire. The leather is dark and supple, blackened in patches by old soot and sweat from the hands that have worked it, and it carries the faint, rich smell of tallow and smoke. You place a hand on the nearest bag and press gently. It yields with a slight resistance, the air inside escaping through the nozzle with a soft whisper, and when you release, It draws air back in through a small wooden valve on the upper side, a simple flap of leather over a hole that opens and closes with each stroke. Both bags are sound, they're stitching tight, they're leather flexible despite years of use. And you take a moment to smear a little fresh tallow from a small pot kept under the frame onto the creases where the leather folds most sharply, working the grease into the hide with your thumb until it softens and gleams. The bellows lever is a long pole of straight beech, its surface worn smooth by the sliding grip of many hands, its far end resting in the forked post that is wrapped with greased wool to quiet the movement. You take hold of the lever with both hands, one over the other, and you lift. The lever rises on its lever hinges, and the upper board of the first bellows bag rises with it, drawing air into the expanding chamber through the valve. You can hear the air enter, a soft suck like a drink through a straw, and then you bear down, pushing the lever earthward, and the board presses down. The bag contracts, and the air rushes out through the nozzle and into the ture with a low, satisfying whoosh. The effect on the furnace is immediate. Through the tire opening, you see the glow within brighten sharply, the orange deepening toward yellow, and the muffled quality of the sound lifts, the roar returning with renewed vigor as the fresh oxygen feeds the hungry charcoal. A brief flare of brighter smoke issues from the furnace top, then steadies into a clean, pale column again, and you feel a small, quiet rightness in the rhythm of things, the furnace responding to your ham the way a horse responds to a gentle heel. You work the bellows in a slow, steady rhythm, lifting and pressing, each full cycle taking perhaps 3 or 4 seconds, a pace that you could maintain for hours if needed. The movement travels through your arms and shoulders and back, a gentle rocking effort that is not strenuous when done correctly, more a matter of weight and balance than of force. The lever does much of the work, its length giving you advantage, and the counterweight of the returning stroke is provided by the elasticity of the leather and the wooden spring of the frame. Your breathing settles into the same rhythm as the bellows, a natural synchrony, and soon the boundary between your own breath and the furnace's breath grows thin. The two of you breathing together in the warm glade, the air moving from the forest into the fire and back out into the sky. The sound of the bellows at work is a complex, layered thing. There is the creak of the wooden frame, a low, groaning note that repeats with each stroke, the timbers flexing minutely under the repeated load. There is the deeper thud of the leather as it reaches the end of its compression, a soft, muffled drumbeat that you feel as much as hear. There is the hiss and rush of the air itself, entering the valve with a sip, exiting through the nozzle with a steady push, and then the furnace's response, the brightening roar that follows each stroke like an echo. These sounds combine into a kind of music, a slow, steady pulse that fills the glade and carries out into the trees, where it mingles with the brook and the birdsong and the rustle of leaves. It is a sound of work, but it is also a sound of calm. A rhythm as old as iron itself, heard in these woods for centuries before you, and destined to be heard for centuries after. Between strokes of the bellows, you continue to feed the furnace, because the air alone is not enough. The fuel and ore must still be added in their alternating layers. You have worked out a system now, a pattern that integrates the bellows with the charging. You give the lever perhaps 20 strokes. A long, steady series that drives the heat deep into the furnace column, and then you leave off, the lever resting in its fork while you take up the shovel and scoop. The furnace does not go cold in these brief pauses. The firebed has enough mass, enough stored heat, that it will hold its temperature for the minute or so it takes you to add a fresh layer of charcoal and ore. You work quickly but without haste, tipping the shovel of charcoal, tipping the scoop of ore, and then returning to the bellows, taking up the lever again, settling back into the rhythm of the stroke. This alternation continues, a larger pattern laid over the smaller pattern, the whole morning becoming a woven fabric of lift, press, shovel, scoop, lift, press. The effect of the forced air on the smelt is gradual but unmistakable. With each series of bellows strokes, the heat in the furnace intensifies, the temperature climbing from the 1200 degrees of the natural draft toward the 1500 or more that the Bloomery process requires to reduce the ore fully and to melt the slag so that it can flow away from the iron. You can see the evidence of this rising heat in the tire opening, where the glow has shifted from orange to a brilliant yellow-white. a color so bright it leaves an afterimage when you look away toward the darker trees. The slag, the unwanted minerals in the ore, is beginning to soften and fuse, and you know that soon it will start to drip from the small tap hole near the furnace base, that dark, glassy stream that signals the smelt's progress toward its climax. But that moment is still some time off, and for now the work continues in its steady, unhurried rhythm. The physical effort of the bellows is warming you from within, a different heat from the furnace's radiant warmth. Where the furnace heat presses against your face and chest when you stand near, the bellows heat comes from your own muscles, a deep, slow burn in the shoulders and upper arms that is not uncomfortable but rather pleasant. The kind of warmth that comes from good, honest work done at a sustainable pace. A trickle of sweat runs down your spine under the linen shirt and wool doublet, and another traces a path from your temple to your jaw, where it drops onto the collar of your doublet and darkens the fabric. The felt hat on your head is damp now around the band, and occasionally you take it off and wipe your brow with your sleeve before replacing it. The brief exposure to the open air cool against your scalp. You are joined for a while by a figure from the forest, someone who appears on the path from the direction of the ford, a boy of perhaps 14 summers, the son of the collier whose charcoal you now burn. He carries a woven basket of withies on his back, empty, having delivered his load somewhere else in the forest, and he pauses at the edge of the glade to watch you work. You nod to him, a small silent greeting, and he nods back, his face serious, his eyes taking in the furnace, the bellows, the piles of ore and charcoal, the smoke rising into the sky. He has seen all this before, many times, but he watches with the close attention of a boy who is learning, who will one day take his place in the long chain of forest work. You do not speak to him, because no words are needed, and after a few minutes he shifts his basket on his shoulders and continues on his way, disappearing down the track toward the ford, leaving you alone once more with the furnace and the bellows and the brook. The rhythm of the bellows continues, and with it the gradual transformation of the materials within the furnace. The ore that you added in the first charges has now descended deep into the hottest zone, where the carbon monoxide gas from the burning charcoal is stripping away its oxygen, reducing the haematite first to magnetite, then to wustite, and finally to metallic iron, a spongy, porous mass of pure metal that does not melt at these temperatures, but instead forms a solid, glowing lump. The bloom. Meanwhile, the earthy impurities, the silica and alumina and lime, are combining with each other and with some of the iron to form a liquid slag, a dark viscous fluid that trickles downward through the charcoal bed and collects at the very bottom of the furnace hearth. This slag is the waste, but it is a useful waste, protecting the iron bloom from the full blast of the air, sealing it from oxidation, and carrying away the unwanted elements. The whole complex chemistry unfolds in the dark heart of the furnace, unseen, known only by its effects, the color of the smoke, the sound of the fire, the slow descent of the charge, and, soon, the appearance of the slag itself. You check the tap hole now, the small opening at the base of the furnace on the side opposite the tire, a narrow channel through the stone and clay that slopes downward from the hearth floor to the outside. With a thin iron rod, you probe the hole gently, feeling for any obstruction, and the tip of the rod comes away with a smear of dark, glossy material, still warm but not yet fluid, the slag just beginning to soften and gather. You wipe the rod on the grass and set it aside. The slag will flow when it is ready, and there is nothing to do but continue the bellows and the charging, maintain the heat, and let the furnace do its work. This patience, this willingness to wait and watch, is as much a part of the smelter's skill as the lighting of the fire or the sizing of the ore, and you've learned it over many years, many smelts, many long afternoons of simply being present while the iron made itself. The sun has passed its zenith now, though you cannot see it directly through the high canopy. Only the angle of the light and the shortening of the shadows tell you that midday is approaching. The glade is warm, the morning chill a distant memory, and the insects have woken fully, a low hum of bees and flies that moves among the bracken and the holly flowers. A dragonfly, its body a brilliant blue-green, hovers for a moment over the brook, then darts away upstream. The bellows creak and whoosh, the furnace roars, the brook chatters, and you work on, your body moving in its steady rhythm, your mind quiet and still as a pool in the deep forest, reflecting only the light and the sound and the slow, ongoing presence of the smelt. The midday stillness settles over the glade like a held breath, the kind of quiet that comes when the sun stands high and the birds take their rest, and even the insects seem to slow their movements in the warmth. You have been working the bellows and feeding the furnace for hours now, the rhythm so deeply established that your body continues it almost without you. The lift and press of the lever, the occasional pause to add another shovel of charcoal and scoop of ore, the whole pattern flowing forward like the brook itself. Steady and unhurried and without end. Now, though, you sense a shift in the smelt's progress, a change in the quality of the sounds and smells that tells you the furnace has entered its middle phase, the long, slow plateau of sustained heat where the real transformation happens, and where your role changes from active feeding to patient watching. You let the bellows lever come to rest in its forked support, the final stroke of air sighing through the tire and brightening the furnace heart for a moment before settling back to the natural draft. The quiet that follows is relative, not silence, but a gentler soundscape, the low roar of the fire still present, but muted, the brook's voice rising to fill the space, and the faint creak of cooling stone as the furnace walls adjust their temperature. You stretch your arms above your head, feeling the pull in your shoulders, the pleasant ache of sustained effort, and then you walk to the hewn log that serves as your seat and lower yourself onto it with a long, slow exhalation. The log is warm from the sun, its top surface worn smooth as polished furniture by years of sitting, and it fits the shape of your body in the way that familiar things do. You take up your leather water bottle, uncork it, and drink. The water is no longer cold, but still cool, the leather having kept the worst of the warmth at bay, and it washes the taste of charcoal dust and iron from your mouth, leaving only the clean, faintly mineral flavor of the brook. You eat a little of the bread and cheese from your pouch, tearing the bread with your fingers, breaking the cheese into small pieces, chewing slowly while you watch the furnace. The food is simple and good, the bread dense and slightly sour from the rye, the cheese hard and sharp, and it restores something that the work has spent, a quiet replenishment that needs no ceremony. You wipe your mouth with the back of your hand, recork the bottle, and settle into the stillness of the midday pause. From where you sit, the furnace stands in profile against the bright green of the alder trees beyond the brook, its squat, tapering shape dark with soot at the top and paler at the base where the sandstone shows through. The smoke that rises from its mouth is thinner now than it was in the morning, a pale, almost colorless plume that shimmers with heat and wavers slightly in the gentle breeze. The color of that smoke tells you a great deal, and you read it without conscious thought, the way you read the sky for weather. When the smoke is pale and nearly invisible, the combustion is clean and complete, the charcoal burning efficiently to provide the heat and the reducing gas that the ore requires. When the smoke darkens, it means the fire is struggling, the airflow insufficient, or the charge too dense, and you would need to clear the tuyere or adjust the bellows. For now, the smoke is pale, and the furnace is content, and you are content to let it be. You turn your attention to the sounds of the smelt, letting them wash over you in layers. The deepest layer is the low, steady roar of the fire, a sound so constant that you have almost ceased to hear it, though you would notice instantly if it changed. Above that is the higher, more variable sound of the gases escaping through the charcoal bed, a kind of whispering crackle that rises and falls in slow waves. Then there is the sound of the slag, which has begun to gather in the hearth and to make its way toward the tap hole. This is a new sound, a soft, wet gurgle that comes from deep within the furnace, almost below the threshold of hearing, more felt than heard, a vibration in the stone that you can detect by placing your palm flat against the warm wall. The slag is forming, pooling, beginning its slow migration toward the exit. And this is one of the most important signs you watch for, the evidence that the earthy impurities are separating from the iron, that the smelt is progressing as it should. You rise from the log and walk to the tap hole, that small, downward-sloping channel on the side of the furnace opposite the tire. The opening is dark, perhaps the width of 2 fingers, its edges blazed with the black, glassy residue of previous smelts. You stoop to look, and there, deep within the hole, you can see a faint glow, the reflected light of the fire in the hearth. And you can see something else, something that brings a quiet satisfaction, a thin, hesitant trickle of slag, no thicker than a straw, creeping down the channel toward the outside. The slag is dark, almost black, with a surface that gleams like wet tar, and it moves with the slow, viscous patience of honey on a cold morning. As you watch, a single drop forms at the lip of the tap hole, swells and falls onto the bed of crushed slag below, where it spreads into a small glossy pool that cools rapidly to a dull, stony grey. The drop is followed by another, and then another, the trickle becoming a slow, intermittent drip, a rhythm that matches the pulse of the fire, each drip marking the steady transformation within. You take up the thin iron rod and gently probe the tap hole, ensuring that the channel remains open, that the slag can flow freely. The rod slides in easily, meeting no resistance, and when you withdraw it, the tip is coated in a thin layer of the slag, which cools almost instantly into a dark, brittle crust. You tap the rod against a stone and the crust falls away in small, glassy flakes that glitter in the sunlight. Then you return to your seat on the log, leaving the slag to drip, the furnace to breathe, the afternoon to unfold. The sun has passed its highest point now, the shadows beginning to lengthen almost imperceptibly. The light in the glade taking on the faintest golden tint that marks the start of the long descent toward evening. The heat of the day is at its peak, and the insects are busy. A low, drowsy hum of bees working the last of the summer flowers among the bracken, the occasional flash of a butterfly's wing, pale against the dark green of the holly. A small flock of finches passes through the canopy, their soft, chattering calls drifting down through the leaves, and then they are gone, and the quiet returns. The brook continues its endless murmur, the sound so constant that it has become a kind of silence in itself, a background against which all other sounds are measured. You sit without moving for a long stretch, your hands resting on your thighs, your breathing slow and deep. This is a part of the smelt that many would find difficult, the waiting, the watching, the long interval of apparent inactivity while the furnace does its work unseen. But you have learned over the years that this watching is as important as the charging and the bellows, that the furnace needs to be observed and understood, its small signals read and interpreted, the color of the smoke, the sound of the fire, the rate of the slag drip. These are the furnace's voice, and if you listen carefully, it will tell you everything you need to know. So you listen and you watch, and the slow minutes pass like the brook water over its stones, unhurried and complete. The slag drip continues, growing slightly in volume as the smelt progresses, the trickle thickening from a straw to a finger, a dark, viscous stream that flows steadily now down the channel and onto the ground, where it forms a growing, glassy mound. The slag bubbles occasionally, small gas pockets escaping from its depths, and when a bubble bursts, it releases a faint, sulphurous wisp that smells of the deep earth, of the minerals that have been locked in the ore and are now being released. This smell mingles with the clean charcoal smoke and the scent of the brook and the warm green smell of the forest, creating a complex, layered fragrance that is the smell of the smelt, the smell of iron being born. You watch the slag mound grow, noting its color and texture, the way it cools from black to gray to a dull, stony brown. The slag is heavy and dense, full of the unwanted elements that the furnace has separated from the iron, and when the smelt is over, you will break it up and spread it on the furnace platform, where it will be trodden into the earth and become part of the foundations for the next campaign. Nothing is wasted in the forest, not the slag, not the ash, not the worn-out tools or the broken bellows leather. Everything finds its use, its place in the slow cycle of making and remaking that has sustained the smelters and the miners and the colliers and the smiths for generations beyond counting. After a while, you rise from the log and approach the furnace again, not because anything needs doing, but because the habit of attention is strong, and you want to place your hand on the stones, to feel the heat and the subtle vibrations that speak of the work within. The walls are hot now, almost too hot to touch for more than a few seconds, the heat soaking out through the porous sandstone and warming the air around the furnace. You can feel the thrum of the fire through your palm, a low, steady pulse that is the heartbeat of the smelt, and you can feel the slight tremors that mark the settling of the charge, the slow descent of the column as the charcoal burns away and the ore sinks ever deeper into the hottest zone. The heat that radiates from the stones dries the sweat on your face almost instantly, leaving your skin tight and warm, and you step back after a moment, satisfied and return to the log. You take out your water bottle again, drink, and then pour a little water into your cupped palm, splashing it onto your face and the back of your neck. The water is cool, startling against your heated skin, and it runs down your collar and dampens the wool of your doublet. A brief, sharp refreshment that clears your head and sharpens your senses. You look up through the gap in the canopy, where the sky is a deep, cloudless blue, the kind of sky that promises a fair evening and a good end to the smelt. The sun will continue its slow descent, the shadows will lengthen, and in a few more hours the smelt will reach its climax, the moment when the bloom is ready and the furnace must be opened. But that moment is still far off, and for now there is only the watching, the listening, the drip of the slag, the murmur of the brook, the warm golden stillness of the afternoon in the forest of Dean. You settle back on the log, your shoulders relaxing, your gaze resting on the furnace and the smoke and the trees beyond, and you let the time pass without resistance, without impatience, without any need for the world to be other than it is. The smelt continues, the slag drips, the fire breathes, and you, the smelter, are simply present, a quiet figure in the glade, keeping watch over the ancient, patient transformation of earth into iron. The afternoon has stretched into its later hours, the sun now visibly sliding toward the tree line on the western side of the glade, its light taking on that deeper honeyed quality that speaks of the day's slow turn toward evening. The shadows of the alder trees have grown longer, reaching across the brook and beginning to touch the edge of the furnace platform, and the air, though still warm, has lost the heavy stillness of midday. A fresher breath now moving through the canopy, stirring the holly leaves and the bracken fronds with a soft, dry rustle. You have been watching the furnace for what feels like a long time, but has also passed without weight, the kind of time that flows differently when you are absorbed in the quiet signals of a smelt. Now, as you study the smoke, the sound, and the rhythm of the slag drip, you begin to recognize the signs that the smelt is nearing its end, that the bloom has formed in the hearth, and the time has come to draw it out. The smoke from the furnace top has changed again during the past hour, shifting from the pale, almost invisible plume of the steady plateau to a more intermittent, thinner wisp that comes in irregular puffs rather than a constant stream. This tells you that the charcoal bed is consuming itself more slowly, that the ore has been reduced, and the fire no longer finds fresh material to work upon. Through the tie-air opening, the glow within has softened from the brilliant yellow-white of the forced draught to a deeper, richer orange, a color that speaks of a mature fire, a fire that has done its work and is now beginning to rest. The sound of the furnace, too, has altered, the low roar diminishing to a gentler, more breathy sigh, the natural draught no longer assisted by the bellows, but still moving through the charge with a slow, persistent current. These are the signs you have learned to read over many smelts, the furnace's way of telling you that the transformation is complete, that the iron has gathered into its spongy, glowing mass, and the slag has flowed away to the hearth bottom, and that nothing more needs to be added, nothing more needs to be added, nothing more needs to be forced, only the careful, patient act of retrieval. You stand up from the log, your muscles a little stiff from the long sitting, and you stretch your arms out to the sides, feeling the pull and the pleasant release. Then you walk to the bellows frame and make a small, deliberate act. You lift the lever from its forked support and lay it down gently on the ground beside the frame. A gesture that means the bellows will not be needed again today, that the active phase of the smelt is over. The leather bags creak softly as they settle, the valves closing, the remaining air seeping out through the nozzle in a long, quiet exhale. You turn from the bellows and take up the long-handled iron rake from where it leans against the shelter post, its tines dark with old soot, its shaft smooth and warm in your grip. The first step in drawing the bloom is to clear the top of the furnace, to remove the remaining charcoal and any unburnt or unreduced ore that may still be sitting in the upper part of the shaft. You approach the furnace top with the rake, the heat radiating upward pressively against your face and chest, and you begin to rake away the loose material, drawing the dark lumps of charcoal out through the top opening and letting them fall onto the ground beside the furnace, where they sizzle faintly and send up small spurts of grey smoke. The charcoal is mostly spent, lighter than it was when you put it in, its structure now hollow and fragile, crumbling as the rake touches it. You work carefully, methodically, clearing the shaft inch by inch, feeling the resistance of the column beneath the rake, the way the remnants of the charge shift and settle as you draw them out. A few pieces of ore come with the charcoal, dark lumps that have not fully reduced, their surfaces pitted and glassy where they began to melt but did not complete their journey. You set these aside on a flat stone. They can be added to the next smelt, returned to the fire for another chance. Nothing is wasted, and the small pile of partially reduced ore will wait quietly until the next time the furnace is lit, its iron still waiting to be born. The clearing continues, the rake scraping against the inner walls of the furnace with a sound like a shovel on gravel, and gradually the shaft empties, the deep orange glow growing brighter and more direct as you remove the layers that have been blocking it. The heat intensifies as you get closer to the hearth, and you squint against it, your face tightening, the sweat springing out on your forehead and running down your cheeks. When the rake can reach no further, you set it aside and take up the iron bar with the flattened end, the tool you use to break open the front arch of the furnace. This is the moment that the whole day has been building toward, the moment of opening, of revealing what the fire has made. And though there is a quiet anticipation in it, there is no hurry, no urgency, only the same calm, deliberate care with which you have done everything else. You position yourself at the front of the furnace, facing the small arch that leads into the hearth chamber. The stones around this opening are blackened and cracked from many smelts, the clay daubed vitrified into a dark, glassy crust that glints in the late sun. With the iron bar in both hands, you insert the flattened end into the seam between two of the stones, finding the place where the daub has already weakened from the heat, and you lever gently. The bar bites, and the stone shifts with a small grinding sound, a puff of fine ash and dust rising from the gap. You work the bar deeper, levering again, and the stone comes loose, revealing a narrow gap through which a brilliant orange light spills out, painting a stripe of glowing color across the dark earth at your feet. You remove the second stone beside it, and then the third, each one coming away with the same grinding reluctance, the same release of stored heat that washes over you in waves, until the front arch is open wide enough for you to reach inside with the tongs. The interior of the furnace hearth is now fully visible, and it is a sight that never grows old, no matter how many times you see it. The hearth is a chamber of living light, the floor pooled with a dark, bubbling lake of slag that glows a deep, sullen red, its surface constantly moving, shifting, small gas bubbles rising from its depths and bursting with a wet, popping sound. And there, sitting in the center of that slag pool like a creature in its nest, is the bloom. It is a spongy, irregular mass of iron, perhaps the size of a large loaf of bread, glowing with a heat so intense that it is almost white at the center, shading through orange and into a deep, dark red at its edges. Its surface is not smooth, but rough and pitted, a moon made of metal and slag, the iron crystals locked together in a loose, porous structure that you will soon consolidate with the hammer. The bloom seems to breathe, pulsing gently with the last gusts of the fire, and steam hisses faintly around it where residual moisture in the slag meets the intense heat. You look at it for a long moment, taking it in, acknowledging the work it represents, the hours of charging and bellows and watching, the ancient, patient chemistry of carbon and iron that has once again done what it has always done. Now you take up the long-shafted iron tongs, their handles thick and smoothly worn, their jaws designed to grip the irregular shape of a bloom. You test the tongs, opening and closing them once, the motion smooth and sure, and then you reach in through the open arch into the blazing heart of the furnace. The jaws of the tongs close around the bloom, and you feel its weight immediately. A heavy, solid resistance that pulls against your arms as you begin to draw it out. The bloom moves, sliding through the slag pool with a slow, sucking sound, and as it emerges from the furnace mouth, the light of the late sun catches it, and it seems to brighten for a moment, as if the fire is greeting the air. You draw it out fully, the bloom steaming and glowing on the end of the tongs, and you swing it carefully away from the furnace toward the low wooden block that serves as your anvil for this first rough hammering. The journey from furnace mouth to anvil block is only a few steps, but it is a moment of great care. The bloom is heavy, perhaps 30 or 40 pounds, and it hangs from the tongs with a pendulous weight, dropping occasional sparks and small globules of slag onto the packed earth, where they sizzle and smoke. You walk slowly, your boots sure on the familiar ground, and you lower the bloom onto the flat surface of the anvil block, where it settles with a soft, heavy thud, the wood beneath it already scarred and blackened from 100 previous blooms. The steam rises from it in a thin, curling column, and the heat that radiates from the glowing mass warms you even at a step's distance. A fierce, dry heat that is the last concentrated essence of the furnace fire. You release the tongs and step back for a moment, breathing deeply, your arms trembling slightly from the effort of drawing the bloom. You wipe your face with your sleeve, leaving a smear of charcoal and iron across your forehead, and you take a drink of water, the cool liquid cutting through the heat and the thirst. The bloom sits on the anvil block, cooling slowly, its color already beginning to shift from the brilliant white-orange of the furnace toward a deeper, rich red, the surface crust of slag solidifying into a dark, glassy shell that crackles as it contracts. The forest around you is quiet now, the birds having fallen still, the brook the only voice, and the late sunlight filters through the alder leaves in shafts of gold that seem to touch everything with a gentle, reverent light. The smelt is done, the bloom is here, and what remains is the hammering, the shaping, the final consolidating work that will turn this spongy mass into honest merchant iron, a material that will travel out of the forest and into the world of nails and tools and horseshoes and hinges, carrying with it the quiet memory of the glade and the furnace and the day. The bloom rests on the anvil block, a spongy, glowing mass of iron and trapped slag, its color shifting slowly from the fierce white-orange of the furnace toward a deeper, richer red as the outside air begins its work of cooling. The steam that rose from it when you first drew it out has settled now, though a thin, wispy vapor still curls from its surface where the last moisture in the clinging slag meets the residual heat. The anvil block is a solid piece of oak, its top surface flattened and burned to a dark, cracked patina by the many blooms that have been hammered on it, and it sits on a bed of packed earth and crushed slag that absorbs the shock of each blow and keeps the whole assembly steady. Around the block, the ground is littered with small, dark flakes of slag from previous hammerings, fragments that glint dully in the late sun, like shattered glass. You stand beside the bloom, breathing deeply from the effort of drawing it from the furnace, letting your arms recover their steadiness while you study the mass of iron that the day has given you. The bloom is irregular, roughly the shape of a large loaf, but with lumpy protrusions and hollows, its surface a dark, crusted shell of slag that has already begun to solidify and crack, the fissures revealing the brighter, metallic heart within. You can see the places where the slag is thick, black and glassy, and the places where the iron shows through, a brilliant, living red that still pulses with the memory of the furnace heat. The bloom is cooling, but it still holds its forge heat, the temperature at which the iron is soft enough to be worked, to be compressed and shaped, and the window of time in which this can be done is generous, but not infinite. You will need to begin soon, but not so soon that you rush. Not so soon that you fail to observe the bloom, to understand its shape and its needs, to plan the sequence of hammer blows that will turn this porous, spongy mass into a solid, usable billet of merchant iron. You take up the heavy iron hammer from where it leans against the anvil block, its head a solid rectangle of dark metal, the striking face polished to a dull, silvery sheen from countless impacts. The hammer weighs perhaps 12 pounds, its heft familiar in your hands, the ash handle smooth and slightly tacky with old sweat and soot, formed to the grip of your palms by years of use. You heft it once, testing the balance, feeling the way the weight pulls at your wrists and forearms, and then you turn back to the bloom, positioning yourself at the side of the anvil block, with your feet spread wide, your body braced for the rhythmic work to come. The first blow is not a full swing, but a gentle placing stroke, the hammer face landing on the highest protrusion of the bloom, with a soft, heavy thud that sends a shiver through the entire mass. The crust of slag at that point shatters and falls away in dark, glassy flakes, revealing the bright, metallic surface of the iron beneath, which glows a brilliant, almost painful orange where the air touches it. You strike again, a little harder, and this time the bloom deforms slightly, the porous iron compressing under the hammer, the trapped slag squeezing out of the voids and running down the sides in thin, glowing rivulets that drip onto the block and cool into dark, brittle threads. The sound of the hammer striking the bloom is a deep, ringing clang that carries through the glade and out into the forest, a sound that is not harsh or jarring, but rather slow and rhythmic, a sound like a great iron bell tolling once, and then again, each strike separated by a pause of several seconds while you reposition, assess, and prepare the next blow. You settle into the hammering as you settled into the bellows and the charging, finding the rhythm that the work demands. Strike, pause, the hammer rising and falling in a steady, deliberate cadence that matches the beat of your heart, the bloom shifting and compressing under each blow, the slag squeezing out in dark, viscous streams that smoke faintly as they hit the cooler air. The physical effort is considerable, the weight of the hammer pulling at your shoulder and back with each lift, the impact jarring through your hands and arms with each strike, but it is a good effort, a clean effort. The kind of work that uses the whole body in a single, focused motion. Your breathing deepens to match the rhythm, a slow, steady in and out that provides the oxygen your muscles need, and a fresh sweat breaks out on your forehead and trickles down your temples, dripping occasionally onto the cooling slag where it sizzles and vanishes. The bloom changes under your hands. With each blow, the spongy, porous mass becomes denser, more solid, the voids closing, the iron crystals locking together into a coherent whole. The shape, too, changes, the irregular protrusions flattening out, the hollows filling, the whole mass slowly transforming from a lumpy, amorphous thing into something approaching a rough block, a billet of iron that a smith could take to his forge and work into 100 useful things. The color of the bloom shifts as it cools, moving from the bright orange of the initial hammering through deeper shades of red and into a dark, sullen crimson, and as it cools, it becomes harder, requiring more force from the hammer to achieve the same compression. You know from long experience exactly when the bloom has cooled enough that further hammering would do more harm than good, and you are approaching that point now. The last few strikes producing a sharper, higher ring, a sound that tells you the iron is no longer soft and forgiving, but is becoming stiff and stubborn. You pause, the hammer resting on the ground beside you, its head still warm from the repeated impacts. You wipe your face with your sleeve, the wool rough against your skin, and you study the bloom, which is now a rough, irregular block of dark, cooling iron. Its surface pitted and scarred by the hammer, but its body dense and solid. A good bloom, a successful smelt. The slag that you have hammered out of it lies around the anvil block in a scattering of dark, glassy fragments, some still warm, others already cool enough to touch, and you will gather these later and add them to the slag pile for the furnace platform, where they will be trodden underfoot and become part of the working surface of the glade. The bloom itself will need more work, a second hammering at a proper smithy with a larger hammer and a hotter forge, but the rough consolidation is done, and the iron is ready to be traded or transported or kept for the next link in the long chain of making that runs through the forest. You take up the tongs again, the same long-shafted tongs you used to draw the bloom from the furnace, and you grip the roughly squared billet, lifting it from the anvil block. It is still heavy, though it weighs less now than it did when you first drew it out, the loss of slag having reduced its mass by a noticeable fraction. You carry it a few steps to a flat stone beside the shelter where you have placed previous blooms to finish cooling, and you set it down gently, the dark iron resting on the paler stone with a faint, metallic clink. The bloom will cool here over the night and into the next day, slowly, naturally, until it is cold enough to handle without tongs, and then it will join the other blooms waiting under the shelter, the small stockpile of iron that you have made over the weeks, and that will eventually be taken to the smith or the factor or the ironmonger, who will pay you in coin or in kind for your work. You straighten and stretch, your back and shoulders a pleasant ache, your hands steady despite the prolonged effort. The sun is now low above the western tree line, its light a deep golden orange that seems to set the alder leaves on fire, turning them into thin, translucent shapes of brilliant color. The shadows have stretched all the way across the glade now, reaching the base of the furnace and climbing its dark, warm stones. The brook still murmurs, its voice the same soft, constant note it has sung all day, and the birds, which had been silent through the hammering, are beginning their evening calls, the first notes of the dusk chorus that will accompany the closing of the day. The furnace stands quiet, its mouth open and dark, the interior still glowing faintly with the last embers of the fire, the slag pool within cooling and solidifying into a dark, glassy floor that will need to be cleared before the next smelt. The tools are scattered around the anvil block, the hammer leaning where you left it, the tongs resting on the ground, the rake and the iron bar and the scoop and shovel, all waiting to be cleaned and put away. You take a long drink from your water bottle, the last of the brook water, now tepid but still refreshing, and then you begin the quiet, methodical work of closing down the smelt. You wipe down the hammer with a rag, removing the worst of the slag and soot, and you lean it carefully against the shelter post. You pick up the tongs and wipe them too, their jaws still warm from the bloom, and you hang them on their hook under the shelter. The rake and the iron bar are cleaned and put away, the scoop and shovel returned to their places, the piles of remaining charcoal and ore neatened and covered against the night dew, the anvil block you leave as it is, the slag fragments around it to be gathered in the morning when the light is good and the body is fresh. Everything finds its place, and the glade settles into an orderly quiet, the signs of the day's work still visible, but the work itself done, complete, put to rest. You stand for a moment in the center of the glade, looking around at the familiar shapes, the furnace, the bellows frame, the shelter, the brook, the trees. The light is fading now, the gold deepening toward amber and then toward grey, and the first star, a single point of silver, appears in the pale sky above the gap in the canopy. The air is cooling rapidly, the warmth of the day lifting, the dampness of evening beginning to rise from the brook and the grass. You feel the tiredness of the day settling into your limbs, a good tiredness, a clean tiredness, the kind that comes from honest work well done. You pick up your water bottle and your food pouch, the leather soft and empty now, and you take one last look at the bloom resting on its stone, a dark, solid shape in the gathering dusk, the iron that you have made from the earth, and the fire and the air. Then you turn toward the sunken track, toward the path that leads through the darkening forest, to your cottage and your hearth and your bed, and you begin to walk. The sunken track leads away from the glade into the trees, a familiar ribbon of darker earth winding between the hazel thickets and the old oaks, its banks soft with moss and last year's leaves. You walk with the slow, steady stride of a man who has worked a full day, and whose body is tired in that deep, satisfied way that comes from using every muscle for its proper purpose. The hobnails of your boots make a soft, rhythmic sound on the packed earth, a gentle scuff and grind that is the only noise you make, and the forest receives you back into its quiet embrace as if you have been gone only a moment rather than a full turning of the sun. The light is fading now, the sun having slipped below the western tree line so that only a soft amber afterglow remains, filtering through the higher branches in long slanting rays that catch the dust in the air and turn it into floating gold. The birds are singing their evening songs, a gentler, more scattered music than the dawn chorus, individual calls that seem to be saying farewell to the day, and the air is cool against your face, carrying the first faint dampness of the approaching night. You pass the leaning oak, the same one you passed this morning when the mist still lay in the hollows and the light was pale and new. Now its split trunk is a dark shape against the dimming sky, its moss a deeper green in the twilight, and you touch its rough bark as you go by, a small gesture of recognition, the same habitual greeting you gave it at dawn. The track drops gently, and you come to the ford across the brook, the water now a dark, liquid mirror reflecting the last light of the sky in streaks of silver and pale pink. The flat stones are still in their places, just as they were this morning, and you cross them with the same sure steps, pausing in the middle to look downstream, where the water vanishes into a tunnel of overhanging alder, dark and quiet and secret. A bat flits overhead, its wings a soft, rapid flutter that you feel more than hear, and then it is gone, and you continue across to the other bank. The track climbs slightly and then levels out, passing the charcoal hearth you noted in the morning, the circular platform of packed blackened earth now almost invisible in the deepening dusk. The smell of old charcoal and damp ash still lingers there, a faint, sharp scent that reminds you of the morning and the lighting of the kindling and the first small flame that grew into the furnace fire. It seems a very long time ago now, though it was only this same day, and you walk on without pausing, your thoughts not so much thoughts as a kind of quiet, wordless review, the events of the smelt passing through your mind like images reflected in the moving water of the brook, the sorting of the charcoal, the weighing of the ore, the lighting of the fire, the long rhythm of the bellows, the slow drip of the slag, the drawing of the bloom, the hammering, the placing of the iron on the cooling stone. All of it is there, complete and whole, and it asks nothing of you now, only that you carry it with you as you walk. The forest darkens around you, the colors leaching from green and brown to gray and black, the shapes of the trees becoming simpler, bolder, their trunks standing out against the sky like pillars in a great silent hall. The birds have fallen quiet, the last of the evening chorus having faded into a single distant blackbird's call that repeats 3 times and then stops, leaving only the sound of your boots on the track and the soft, dry rustle of the night breeze in the highest leaves. The air is cool now, really cool, the kind of cool that makes you aware of the warmth of your own body, the residual heat of the furnace work still radiating from your skin, trapped in the wool of your doublet and breeches. You breathe in the cool air, and it is clean and fresh, tasting of the forest, of leaf mold and moss, and the faint, distant sweetness of some night-blooming flower you have never seen. Ahead, through the trees, a small point of warm orange light appears, and then another, and you know it is the unshuttered window of your cottage, the hearth fire within still alive, still glowing, waiting for your return. The sight of it is a quiet comfort, not a lifting of the spirits so much as a settling, a confirmation that the world is as it should be, that the cottage is there and the fire is there and the bed is there. You walk toward the light, and the track widens, the trees falling back, and then you are at the threshold flagstone, the same worn dip in the stone that your boots have crossed 1,000 times. The cottage door is as you left it, the latch down, the thatch above, smelling of dried reed and wood smoke, and you lift the latch with your thumb and push the door open and step inside. The interior of the cottage is warm and still, the air thick with the smell of the hearth fire, of old wood and warm earth, and the faint pleasant tang of the pottage that you left simmering this morning. The fire has burned low while you were gone, a bed of glowing coals that pulses with a soft, deep red, and the room is lit only by that glow and the last faint light from the window. You close the door behind you, dropping the latch into place, and you stand for a moment in the middle of the packed earth floor, letting the warmth of the cottage settle around your shoulders like a blanket. Your body feels heavy now, the tiredness that was a pleasant ache beginning to deepen into a real weariness, the kind that will carry you easily into sleep. You take off your felt hat and hang it on its peg by the door, then you unlace your boots, pulling the leather thongs loose and working each boot off with a sigh of relief. The woolen hose come next, damp with sweat, and you hang them over the back of the wooden stool near the hearth, so that they will dry by morning. Your feet, freed from the boots, are warm and slightly swollen, and you flex your toes against the packed earth floor, feeling the familiar texture, the slight coolness. Then you move to the hearth and crouch down, taking up the iron poker and stirring the embers gently, adding a few small logs from the pile beside the hearthstone, placing them carefully so that they will catch slowly and burn through the night. The flame that rises is small and blue at first, then orange, then a steady soft yellow, and it fills the room with a gentle flickering light that dances on the walls and the ceiling and the dark, rough timbers of the roof. You take the iron pot from its trivet and ladle the remaining pottage into your wooden bowl. It is thick now, having simmered all day, the barley grains swollen and soft, the leeks melted into almost nothing, the bacon giving its salt and smoke to the whole. You eat slowly, sitting on the stool by the fire, the bowl warm in your hands, the food simple and filling, and when the bowl is empty, you rinse it with water from the bucket and set it upside down on the hearthstone, just as you did this morning. The repetition of these small, domestic actions is a comfort in itself, a closing of the circle that began when you woke and that now returns to the same quiet place, the same bowl and bucket, the same hearth and stool, the same hands doing the same things in the same way that they always have. The cottage is quiet. Outside, the forest is fully dark now, the window a square of deep soft black, and the only sounds are the small settling creaks of the timbers, the occasional pop of the fire, and the very faint, distant call of an owl somewhere far off among the oaks. You sit for a while longer, letting the warmth of the fire soak into your tired muscles, your mind no longer busy with the smelt, but simply resting, open and calm. You think, without forming the thought into words, of the bloom you left on the cooling stone, its dark, solid shape waiting in the glade under the stars, and you think of the furnace, its mouth open to the night, its interior still warm, the slag within cooling and cracking, settling into the dark, glassy floor of the hearth. The furnace will wait, as it always waits, and in a day or 2 or 3 you will return to it, clear out the old slag, sort more charcoal and ore, and light the fire again. And the whole cycle will begin anew. The same quiet, patient work that has been done in these woods since before anyone can remember, and that will be done long after you are gone. You stand from the stool, your body moving slowly now, and you crush to the bed in the corner, the straw-filled mattress on its wooden frame, the heap of wool blankets waiting. You undress to your linen shirt, hanging your doublet and breeches on the peg, and then you slide under the blankets, the wool scratchy and warm against your skin. The mattress rustles softly as you settle, the straw shifting to accept the weight of your body, and you lie on your back, looking up at the dark, low ceiling, the faint, flickering light of the fire playing across the rough plaster. You can feel the tiredness now in every part of you, a deep, slow current that runs from the crown of your head to the soles of your feet, and you let it come, offering no resistance, your breathing slowing, your limbs growing heavy, your thoughts dissolving into a soft, comfortable haze. The fire burns low, the last log settling into the embers, and the light in the room dims to a dull, red glow that is almost darkness. The cottage is quiet, the forest beyond is quiet, and the whole long day, the mist and the charcoal and the ore and the fire and the bellows and the slag and the bloom and the hammer and the walk home, all of it recedes into a gentle, distant memory, like a story that has been told and is now finished. You close your eyes, and there is nothing more that needs to be done, nothing more that needs to be thought, only the slow, steady breathing, the warmth of the blankets, the soft, embracing quiet. Outside, the stars wheel slowly over the forest of Dean. The brook continues its patient murmur. The furnace cools in the dark glade, and you, the smelter, drift into a deep, untroubled sleep, as calm and as complete as the iron resting on the stone under the same ancient Elizabethan sky.